The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 4051 in the name of Iain-Gray on value of instrumental music tuition. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in the debate please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And Mr Gray, if you are ready, I'll call on you to open this debate, please. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This evening's debate on the value of instrumental music tuition is prompted by research undertaken by the EIS, which established that 24 out of 32 councils charge up to £340 per year for instrument tuition in schools. 5 of them even charge for tuition for pupils who are required to learn an instrument as part of studying for music exams. And 11 authorities have raised fees in the past year. I want to put on record my pride that my own council, East Lothian, is one of the 8 who do not charge for music tuition. And I want to congratulate Scotland on Sunday for their consequent campaign, Let the Children Play, which argues that instrument tuition should be free, especially for those studying music, and that the Scottish Government should take a lead in making that happen. There is a precedent for this in Jack McConnell's Youth Music Initiative. This ensures that every pupil has the chance to try out a year of instrumental tuition by primary 6. Thousands of youngsters have benefited from the scheme, and the SNP Scottish Government since 2007 have continued the scheme, for which they deserve all credit. But in most of Scotland, pupils inspired by the initiative to continue their instrument have to pay, and that means for many that the opportunity is lost. So my motion is prompted by all of this, but it is driven by personal experience, because all 3 of my daughters benefited from free music tuition in schools. 1 learned violin, 1 the clarinet, and 1 the bassoon. All of them participated in school bands, wind bands, and 2 of them in the Edinburgh Secondary School's orchestra. 1 is now an instrument teacher herself, but all 3 were challenged, enriched and inspired by music. I am sure that they are better, broader-minded, happier adults for it. And of course, that view is supported by research such as that cited in my motion from Harvard Medical School, showing that pupils who play an instrument demonstrate better motor, auditory, vocabulary and non-verbal reasoning skills. And evidence like that is part of the answer too to the rather obvious criticism that, given Labour's argument that we must debate carefully what benefits can be provided free, this is not the time to argue for free instrument tuition. But that misses the point, just as COSLA does when they say, let's be clear, what we are talking about here is extracurricular music tuition, setting aside the fact that in 5 councils we are actually talking about SQA exam courses. The crux is that this should be part of the core provision of our schools and therefore provided without charge. If we think schools are just about getting pupils through exams, then our aspiration is narrow and our ambition limited indeed. At its most intense, the benefits of music participation are seen in El Sistema, the engagement of a whole community as pioneered in Venezuela and currently transforming the Raploch in Stirling. And I spent Midsummer's Evening watching the children of the Raploch sit in the midst of an orchestra from Venezuela, thousands of miles away, playing with them a Beethoven overture from hundreds of years ago. No one there needed to be told that music has the power to transcend distance, time and culture, and to transform the lives of those it touches, because that truth shone transparently in the faces of the children of the big noise. Now, we cannot have that everywhere, but we can have music tuition, and we've all seen some of that when we see the parents at school concerts watch their own children conjure beauty, no matter how falteringly, from the thin air. And I remember when I taught in Mozambique, my class's timetable included mandatory singing, not from me, fortunately. In a country torn by war and ravaged by famine, people sang. The children sang everywhere, all the time, in heartbreakingly perfect harmonies. And just as young men tied rags together to play football, they constructed guitars from any disused box they could find so they could make music. In Cambodia, too, a country rebuilding from nothing, with nothing, I have seen establishing a school of music and dance prioritised because they understood music's magic in bringing people together and raising them up, and because they knew that the Khmer Rouge killed the musicians first, because they understood that too. And nearer home, when I lived in Wester Hailes, I remember the whole community, a community who had little, clubbing together to buy a saxophone for one Tommy Smith so that he could take up his place at Berkeley. He'd learned through the kind of tuition we are debating tonight, and that community understood that the glory of his jazz enriched them all. So, if where people have so little, they can find the time and resource to sing and to play and to learn, then why do we have to debate whether we can let our children play? Lack of money need not hold us back, but lack of vision surely will. Nicola Benedetti told Scotland on Sunday, learning an instrument is about understanding the creative, spiritual thing that goes on inside of us. It goes to the heart of who we are as human beings. How can it possibly be separated by something as superficial as whether you can pay for your lesson or not? Now, I know that it is not practical that anyone can learn any instrument anywhere on demand. But the Scottish Government can take a lead now in pushing open a door which is closing in the faces of too many young Scots across our country. That goes to the heart of who we are as human beings, but also to the heart of what we want to be as a country.
Many thanks. Now call on Claire Adamson to be followed by Jenny Mara. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I congratulate Iain-Gray on bringing this very important debate to the Chamber this evening, and his passion in this area was very evident in the speech that he has just given. I opened my speech by almost overtaking, I would say, George Adam in mentioning my hometown in this chamber, something that I will have to do, but I am from Lanarkshire. I am Motherwell born, and growing up in that area and taking my first steps as a budding clarinetist, I was very aware of the renowned musician and conductor Sir Alexander Gibson. And I know in my case this was an ambition which was very much an endeavour of enthusiasm over talent, unlike my colleague Stuart McMillan, who's a very talented piper, and also Nigel Dawn, who's a brass instrumentalist and is very disappointed he's unable to speak in the debate this evening. Presiding Officer, earlier this year I was lucky enough to attend a concert in Glasgow to celebrate Scottish Opera's 50th anniversary. Sir Alexander Gibson founded Scottish Opera in 1962 and was music director until 1986. In doing so, he opened up the world of opera for Scotland, and I particularly remember the Opera in the Round programme, which gave me my lifetime love of this genre after seeing Madame Butterfly. Scottish Opera is truly an opera company for the nation, and Alexander Gibson enriched our lives and art form itself with often world-acclaimed productions. And of course, Alexander Gibson is also a native of Motherwell. So it's no surprise that North Lanarkshire Council have continued the tradition that nurtured his talent at DL High School, and many have benefited from the wonderful legacy, and they do have excellent music provision in their schools. Every Friday evening, pupils participating in the North Lanarkshire Schools music groups are given an opportunity to attend Coatbridge High School and bring together an incredible array of talent in their wind ensemble, chorus, symphony orchestra, junior and senior string orchestras, jazz orchestra, wind band, prep band, pipe band, and finally the traditional music group. So there's no doubt in my mind that pupils are benefiting from music tuition and opportunities to participate in ensemble and group musicianships. And Iain-Gray has mentioned the charging, and it's a very complicated area with very many variations across Scotland. And that's maybe something that we could address with COSLA to actually look into the variations. North Lanarkshire Council do not charge for SQA students or for those whose families or carers are in receipt of benefits. But it's a very complicated situation across the country. It's my belief from the research I've done that only 5 councils charge for SQA activity, and I believe that that is something that is definitely to be looked at. And as we move forward with Curriculum for Excellence, we must also consider the possible impact of the 2+2+2 or the 3+3 models of teaching in schools. The later in the progression through school, at which point a student chooses music, must be considered, as this could lead to an extra year's cost in the 3+3 model before the choice of music has been made. And we must also consider, when we're considering access to the whole area of music, that it's much more complicated than just a charging for tuition. We must also consider access to instruments, which may have to be sourced privately by the parents, adding additional costs and possibly disenfranchising some pupils. And I note that Systema Scotland provide the instruments in the Rathlock. Certainly.
I passionately believe that Scotland and Scottish people are going through a renaissance in terms of searching and finding our identity. And this is why I think music for children is absolutely vital in that. I totally agree with what you're saying, but I think the call for the Scottish Government to assist in this process is an important one. And I think we should really look for ways in how we can encourage our young to come forward and develop the skills so that they can identify themselves with their nation, not Americanized or Angloized, but Scottish.
Claire Adamson.
And Salam Malik for his intervention. And yes, I do believe that there is much that we could do in this area. However, I do believe that what the Scottish Government does in the Youth Music Initiative is possibly the most important, as it's there to ignite the fire in our young people and inspire them to go on and participate in music throughout their school careers. But that should not be conflated with what is curricular delivery, and that's the responsibility of the local authorities, and it's something that COSLA and the local authorities have to resolve. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Jenny Manor, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Why is music tuition important? For the simple reason that music and sport give children another option. On a recent visit to my old high school in Dundee, one teacher said to me, "It is music and sport that our kids need." For some who won't achieve academically, and for those who don't want to, sport and music gives them the chance to find a path and opens up a myriad of opportunities. Anyone, presiding officer, who has played in a band, orchestra or a sports team will know how much of a leveller sport and music can be. People who were born with privilege and wealth occupy a level playing field with those who were born without. Because as soon as you lift your bow to your fiddle or have the ball at your feet, all that matters is what you do with it, the sound you produce, the pass that you make. Everything else pales. And that is why these chances are so important. And that is why, in a time of recession when 100,000 young people in Scotland of working age are sitting at home today, wise investment is to equip children with the skills that they will use to forge their own paths, make their own money, create new and different careers for themselves. And I think the government should consider this as much an economic argument as a cultural one. This is what our education system is for, as Iain-Gray said, equipping children with the skills they need to go out and make their way in the world. From the young Dundonian who paid his way round a trip to Venezuela by beating old men at chess in pavement cafes for money, which he learned in his Dundee primary school, or the inimitable Gary Clark, lead singer of the Dundee band Danny Wilson, who learned music in his own community in Douglas and Dundee, and is now a songwriter for the likes of Natalie Imbruglia in Los Angeles. The economic and life opportunities of these so-called extracurricular activities knows no bounds. Our Children's Commissioner conducted his big blether throughout Scotland recently. A message that he heard from children the length and breadth of this country was this. They said that chances always go to children from families with money. This came from the mouths of under 10-year-olds. It's enough to make you weep. They know that educational opportunities are not blind. In Dundee, in Sidlaw View Primary School in Kirkton today, 4 children are learning to play a musical instrument. Down the road, in the affluent area of Broughty Ferry, 83 children are learning to play in one primary school called Fort Hill. In other areas of deprivation, the story is the same. In Charleston Primary, 6 children get instrumental tuition. In Lochee, it is 8. The cost of lessons is not the only barrier, but it is a significant one. In Dundee, the council charges pupils £132 per year for lessons and another £83 to hire their instrument. Children who qualify for free school meals or a clothing grant are exempt from these charges but face other barriers. And at a time when increasing numbers of school children in Dundee are turning up at school without having been fed, when the number of people seeking help from food banks is on the rise, as fuel bills are going up and people are making the choice between heating and eating, instrumental fees are about the last thing that families can afford to pay for. A couple of weeks ago, we had a debate in this chamber about universalism. Labour argued that a mix of universalism and targeted benefits or spending priorities should be based on evidence. And here, I think the evidence is overwhelming and very well articulated by the Scotland on Sunday campaign. The Scottish Government has accepted the evidence of the intense music instruction programme Big Noise in Stirling's Raploch, to the extent that the Government has given over £1 million to another Big Noise project in Govan Hill. For music tuition in all our schools to resemble a map of deprivation as it does in Dundee is not good enough for an ambitious, cultured and civilised Scotland. Let us be bold, ambitious, feel the incredible inspiration of musical heritage in our country, and let all of our children play.
Many thanks. Now calling Liz Smith to be followed by Tavish Scott.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I think Iain-Gray has selected what is one of the most important topics in our schools today, and can I commend him for what I thought was a very powerful speech to introduce this debate. As he says, music, in whatever capacity it might be, should be at the heart of any curriculum, not just because of the educational and social benefits which it brings, but because of the description that he gave about its power to transform lives. And we have seen that on the grand scale in El Sistema, thankfully to be expanded across Scotland. But there is the additional factor, I would suggest, that music provides a very important self-discipline, and very often the ambition for pupils to do well in other subjects, and I think that's a very important aspect of it. And it's very definitely not to be treated as an optional extra, which, in the words of Nicola Benedetti, would be a situation that would do untold damage to the cultural fabric of Scotland. We know that music is, in principle, very firmly embedded within the curriculum for excellence, but we also know that its provision, particularly when it comes to instrumental tuition, is very patchy across Scotland, and that this situation largely relates to costs, as both Claire Adamson and Jenny Mara have said. In particular, our concerns relate to the very wide variation across the local authorities. And at the Education Committee just a few months ago, we were presented with the very stark reality of the statistics, because out of 32 local authorities in Scotland, 3/4 are charging for instrumental music tuition, and that individual charge is varying from £95 to £340. And in many cases over the last 2 or 3 years, the costs have continued to rise, and I think it's in 11 local authorities just in the last year, they have announced increases that are well above the rate of inflation. But just as importantly, however, are the 5 councils, and it was 6, so it is good to hear that one has changed its mind, have indicated that they are still charging students for entering SQA exams. So notwithstanding the fact that we know that budgets are extremely tight, and again, at the Education Committee we were told about the effect of that, it is simply unacceptable that some councils see music as an easy target when it comes to budget cuts. And sometimes there is a hint that it is also because it is a source of generating additional income. And I think that's a situation about which we all feel distinctly uncomfortable in this Parliament. There is also the variation when it comes to the differences between primary and secondary schools, and I think that is something that we have to accept needs to be dealt with very quickly. Because if music is to be treated as an important part of curriculum for excellence, and I'm sure everybody has a unanimous view on that, then it is very hard to square with what is happening with the families who are obviously having to be paying very expensive fees. And parents would rightly be very confused and angry, I think, if they were to have to face yet more increases in that regard. And I think there is the added concern for parents who are already paying their taxes to local authorities that this is something that they find reprehensible. Deputy Presiding Officer, we've been told that it may not be possible to avoid additional charges altogether, and I can accept that up to a point, given the nature of some of the tuition that is required. However, if we do get into a situation where there may have to be some charges, then can I suggest that local authorities have to be a bit more imaginative about possible sources for additional incomes? We've seen some of them very interested in the concepts of trusts when it comes to sport, and I wonder if there's something that can be done on the same basis for music, or involving local businesses if we do have to find some additional funds. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, may I finish by congratulating Iain-Gray, because I think this is a very important debate, and again he spoke with considerable passion about it, and that's something for us all to take on board.
Thank you very much. Now Colin Tavish-Scott, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Reminder, or could incur the wrath of that spouse by going to a concert. Kevin Henderson's new band, Amos, are mixing all that is good about Shetland and Norwegian music, and I can commend A Good Night to Parliament. But probably I should start by agreeing wholeheartedly with Iain-Gray's central contention that music is a central part of schooling, not an add-on, but at a school's core. Fiddle and the playing of the traditional fiddle is part of Shetland's DNA. The island's international reputation rests on the playing of reels and slow airs, on the playing of something that is uniquely Shetland. But generations of local fiddlers have stretched Shetland's musical expertise by listening, learning, and indeed adapting the moods and swings of international music to the local genre. Ali Bain, Chris Stout, Maggie Adamson, a two-time winner of the Glenfiddich Fiddler of the Year Award, are widely known and admired. And there are few better nights than the Shetland Folk Festival, Shetland Night at Celtic Connections in Glasgow, indeed every night is Shetland Night at Celtic Connections, or the recent Anderson High School centenary concert at Mariel, which featured pupils past and present in a musical tour de force. There were the stars that night. Johnny Paulson, Louis Peterson, Ryan Cooper and Eric Peterson all have music in their blood, but they all came through the Shetland school system, and that, Presiding Officer, is the point. As one international supporter of Shetland fiddle music observes, there is no other island community in the world that can boast of such high concentration of musicians grounded in a tradition that captivates all who hear it. Much of that starts in Shetland schools. Musical abilities learnt at a young age are retained through life. People keep playing. Thousands of Shetland bairns have learnt the fiddle, although I am thankfully an example of a much-needed quality control check in primary school. Today, 200 pupils take traditional fiddle lessons in Shetland, but financial pressures, as colleagues have explained already in this debate, do exist. I am very concerned that the limits applied in many other local authority areas, such as aptitude tests, cutting the ration of the ratio of children receiving musical tuition, cutting everything other than fiddle and piano, could happen at home as well. That would affect 280 Shetland pupils being taught cello, accordion, drums, trumpet and other instruments. Fees for lessons are difficult enough for many parents, but a lesson only lasting 25 minutes doesn't work, as many pupils and music teachers make clear. Overall, even in these days of financial challenges which Shetland Islands Council faces, I trust that a current review into musical tuition, the second in 2 years, will create a bedrock of support for music in Shetland schools. A letter from the adjudicators to the Shetland Young Musician of the Year, and indeed the Schools Festival held every year in the island, best proves it, when they write, "In Shetland today you have a very high standard of musical achievement that enhances the life and culture of the islands." So Iain-Gray's comment and observations about Scotland goes for individual parts of Scotland, such as the island. On the festival, I would ask the Minister to clarify the funding that has come through Creative Scotland's very welcome Youth Music Initiative, indeed, as Iain-Gray mentioned, rightly introduced by a previous government. I understand that that has been cut for the future, certainly as it affects Shetland. But the schools festival involves children from across the islands. That's its benefit. Playing before a large audience when at primary school is about self-confidence, it's about ability, and it should also be about fun, although try telling that before you walk onto a stage in front of 600 parents. It's an event that builds Shetland, not just its musical future. This is, as Iain-Gray said, in the context of Scotland, about our culture, our place in the world, and how we show what we are. It's not just about fiddle, but it's about instruments that are central to an outward-looking vision. I only can urge my council at home to make responsible decisions which reflect music's role in 21st Shetland, and in that, with everyone in this chamber who wants the same for Scotland.
Many thanks. Now calling Stuart McMillan to be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I too congratulate Iain-Gray for securing this members' debate, and certainly when he spoke earlier on, it was obviously from someone with a great deal of passion and commitment about this, and I commend him for that. I think some of the comments we've heard so far, I want to thank Claire Adamson for the plug about the piping earlier on, but also I think Jenny Mara's kind of opening I thought was actually very interesting. I wholeheartedly agree with certainly kind of the first half of what she had to say earlier on. I agree with the general thrust of Iain-Gray's motion, but I'm not too sure as to how the Scotland Sundays Let the Children Play campaign could fully be implemented. As members will know, I do play the bagpipes, but I wasn't taught them in school. I actually learned them at the First Port Glasgow Boys Brigade. Tuition was free. We paid for it by playing at the gala days and also at functions throughout the year. Now, piping, and indeed many musical instruments, I mean, they're not cheap. They're pretty expensive, and certainly with the pipe bands, you've got the cost of uniforms, the pipes, the drums, the drum skins, the drone reeds, the pipe reeds, the transport and accommodation when actually travelling to and from a function. So, and also there is not an unlimited pot of money from which the vast majority of parents or bands or schools can actually take from. And that's, I mean, it's very much an important point I think we will all take away from tonight's debate. Making sure that the cost of music tuition is affordable is vital, certainly for our younger people. But it's also imperative that we do recognise that music tuition doesn't only happen in schools. Now, I'm going to go into local authorities in a moment, but I want to highlight just an example of one organisation that I think does a tremendous amount of work, and it's something that Hanzala Malik himself, we've actually discussed this in the past. It's the College of Piping in Glasgow. On average, they take over 500 piping students a year, and certainly on a Monday evening, that's an evening where they actually do tuition for free, and they also actually provide the supply equipment, so the pipes, and the drums, and also some of the uniforms for younger people who come from disadvantaged areas. And a further example of the excellent work that the College of Piping do was when they actually paid for a set of pipes of a value of approximately £1,000 and gave them to a young boy to aid him in his efforts for piping. Now, I mean, a set of pipes are not cheap, £1,000, and that's a cheap set of pipes. So, I mean, I think we should all kind of congratulate the work of the College of Piping, and they do a tremendous amount of work for the piping community and also for the local communities in which they actually serve. Now, to briefly touch upon the work of local authorities, I warmly welcome and congratulate the 8 areas who have no charge for music tuition. And I certainly would hope that the other areas, other 24 in Scotland, can actually have a look at their charging regime and see if they can actually make the charging a bit less. I mean, I know certainly I stay in Inverclyde, as people know, and I mean, the Inverclyde charge £95 a year. It's not a lot of money in kind of the grand scheme of things, but for some families it will be a lot of money. But I mean, that certainly, the local authorities who do charge, £95 is the lowest sum compared to some £340 for Aberdeen City. But I think there's one kind of key point to this, is that I don't believe that we can tell local authorities what to do. And a recent local government and regeneration committee meeting on the 31st of October, and it's column 1343 for the official report, Councillor Michael Cook, the Vice President of COSLA, was clear in the powers and responsibilities of our councils, and he stated, we need to recognise that when it comes to a whole range of factors, there is legitimate variation based on local democracy. It is up to the councillors, who are the local democratic agents within councils, to make a policy judgment about some of those things. It may also partly be a consequence of policy determinations that those elected members have made, and that is absolutely right. Sometimes we hear complaints about the postcode lottery. Sometimes the postcode lottery is local democracy in action. And that certainly was a very powerful kind of point and argument that Councillor Cook put forward.
Members in his last minute.
I'm just concluding. I can talk to you about it later on, but I'm just concluding. I think that there is so much more that we can actually highlight and discuss tonight, but obviously time is short, Presiding Officer. I know how beneficial playing an instrument actually is. I know how certainly it's been beneficial for me from a personal point of view, but I do think we need to recognise that music tuition doesn't only happen in schools. And I think just one final point, Presiding Officer, I think we do have to also recognise the comments of Councillor Michael Cook for the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now call on Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I add my congratulations to Iain-Gray for securing this debate and for raising the profile of this issue as he has done now for many months. The newspaper Scotland on Sunday also deserves credit for its championing of the issue. And like many colleagues speaking in this debate, I have a deep and abiding love of music and a great admiration for those who can play an instrument proficiently. I persevered at violin and guitar lessons for more years than I'd like to admit, before eventually deciding that I simply didn't have a talent for it. I still have my violin, however, and if there's no one else at home and the house is quiet, I have been known to bring it out of its cupboard and to play a little. And I have to say, every time I do, I remember just how much I enjoy it. Not sure anyone else does, though. I don't regret in any way the lessons I took or the time I spent trying to master these instruments, because I've benefited so much from that time. My world was expanded, and not just musically. Playing an instrument gave me an interest in a fairly eclectic mix of music. It taught me that music, like so many other things, is influenced by our environment and our history and our society. It helped me to become a more confident person. And playing in the school orchestra taught me the real value of teamwork and the importance of the individual's contribution to that team. And the Harvard research, which Iain-Gray mentioned earlier, bears this out, but then so too should our intuition. My experience tells me that the opportunity to play a musical instrument should not be regarded as an extra. It should be recognised as an important, indeed vital part of the curriculum, and should be available to all children. It cannot simply be the preserve of those who can pay for their child's tuition, because talent doesn't recognise social class, and we could be missing out on our next Nicola Benedetti if we limit the opportunities our young people have. Now, like other colleagues, I was very concerned to read about those local authorities who've decided to charge for musical tuition. And I know that budgets are tight, but for too long now, the arts and sometimes sport have been seen as an easy hit when cuts have to be made. That's one of the reasons why the Youth Music Initiative was introduced in the first place. And I would gently point out to Stuart McMillan that that's an example of government telling local authorities that this is a sensible thing to do, and then leaving them to democratically decide how they go about delivering it, reflecting their own areas and their own interests. But my concern was even more piqued by hearing about young people sitting standard grades and other qualifications in music who are being asked to pay for their tuition. And the idea of an aptitude test is frankly unacceptable, because it isn't just about your ability to play. It's about the enjoyment, the experience and the life-expanding opportunities that you have from your contribution. Now, the Youth Music Initiative is an excellent first step on the ladder for many young people, but it was never intended to end there, because it is frankly cruel to give children a taste of what might be possible, but then to suggest that if you want to pursue your talent or your interest, you have to pay. And we can all be inspired by El Sistema and what the Big Noise Orchestra has achieved in Rathbloch. And like my colleague Jenny Mara, I'm working hard with partners in my constituency to try to bring Sistema to my area. And I know that El Sistema can't be replicated in every community in Scotland, but I think that their success shows that if enough young people have the opportunity to take up music, we can do great things. On a visit to Malawi, I was intrigued and moved to be greeted by the school band. Instruments made of oil cans and string, but capable of being tuned and producing music. They valued their music, and their ability was recognised and valued by their communities. Presiding Officer, I very much hope that the Scottish Government will take the opportunity of considering how it might better support those young people in Scotland who wish to be involved in music and music making. Because if we don't take action soon, we could end up losing an entire generation of music makers.
Thank you very much. I now call on Alison Johnson to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you. I too thank Iain-Gray for securing this debate this evening and welcome the opportunity to discuss this important issue. I wholeheartedly support the motion we debate, noting, as it does, the many widely acknowledged benefits to learning that instrumental music tuition provides, and the confidence, self-esteem and enjoyment gained from developing such life-enhancing, indeed sometimes life-changing skills are worthy of note too. And I'd like to highlight the excellent work that goes on in the City of Edinburgh Music School, work that paves the way for students there to secure positions in world-renowned colleges, ensembles and orchestras across the globe. As we've heard earlier this year, following an investigation by the EIS, they reported that across the country there was a mixed picture regarding provision of instrumental music tuition, out with core teaching hours. And it also showed that several local authorities were charging pupils for SQA-accredited courses and sometimes charging more than necessary to cover the costs of music tuition. The Curriculum for Excellence states that performing and creating music will be prominent activities for all learners, and this won't be the case where ability to pay is a factor in pupils selecting subjects. The EIS Charter for Instrumental Music explains the many benefits music provision gives us as a society and how current cuts to instrumental music tuition must be challenged if we're seriously committed to a curriculum that makes instrumental music provision a core part of our young learners' education. One of the case studies in the Charter tells us, "At school, I was non-academic. I failed in most subjects. This learner, through guitar lessons in secondary school, discovered a world they describe as non-discriminatory, enjoyable, and one that fitted them like a Cinderella slipper. The learner describes musical instrument tuition as vital to enabling them to find a positive path to follow through education." And Jenny Mara quite rightly highlighted this. One-size education doesn't fit all, and variety is essential. In some local authorities where curriculum time provision is free, budgetary constraints still mean that it is limited to the few chosen individuals who've shown an aptitude when tested. And while the tuition is free, instrument hire or purchase is still at the expense of parents or carers. This approach means that many children are persuaded of a relative lack of talent at a young age, and some might be unable to take up the offer should instrument cost be beyond the family budget. Instrumental music tuition makes an important contribution to the 4 capacities outlined in the Curriculum for Excellence. It's delivered by dedicated, highly skilled and qualified professionals, and it should rightly play an important role in the education of the rounded citizens that the Curriculum for Excellence strives to develop. We have yet to achieve delivery of sufficient PE to all our pupils, and if we're serious about a holistic curriculum, we have to stop seeing certain subjects as less worthy of funding than others. I am sure that we all want Scottish education to encourage creativity and to value this creativity and to place it at the heart of the curriculum. And it is a fact that for many pupils whose parents and carers have work schedules, shifts, siblings to care for, and for those on tight budgets, sometimes access to music tuition outside schools, even if it is affordable, it might simply be inaccessible. And that's why I think it's so vitally important that music's importance is recognised and embedded totally within the curriculum. I support the aims of the EIS Charter for instrumental music, and I would welcome the Minister's comments regarding the entitlement, the right for every school-aged child to receive instrumental provision in a musical instrument, and not only for a period of several weeks. And finally, Presiding Officer, in response to my question in September, the Minister advised that the Government had been in touch with local authorities with a view to levelling out the playing field across Scotland, and I would be grateful if the Minister would provide an update in his speech. Thank you.
Many thanks. And as this debate is heavily subscribed, I would be prepared to accept a motion under Rule 8.14 to expand and extend this debate by up to 15 minutes. Iain-Gray? Thank you very much. Are we all agreed? Thank you. I now call on Malcolm Chisholm, after which we'll move to closing speech.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer. It's probably my fault that the debate's been extended, because I didn't intend to speak in the debate at all, but I have found several of the speeches this evening very inspiring, and I do think the debate has certainly raised lots of really significant issues. I suppose a lot of it may be couched in terms of what can be directed from central government and what will local government decide, and also it leads us to the debates we've been having about what should be free and what should be charged for. So, without prejudging the Minister, I suspect some in government will say we can't tell local authorities what to do and we can't have any more free services because of the financial difficulties. I think this would be a wrong approach, which is why we've suggested we should really open up the whole debate about free entitlements in terms of basic principles. And I think what I've concluded from this debate is two things. Firstly, music education is extremely important, and I think Iain-Gray, in a very powerful speech, indicated the many reasons why it is so important. Some of them are referred to in the motion in terms of the evidence about the general effects it have on people's development, but we also know the very great pleasure that people get from music and the way in which it contributes to their happiness and well-being. So I think that's one thing, but I think the second issue that I started thinking about during the debate was really the main theme of Jenny Mara's speech, which is the inequalities which exist round this particular issue. Now, we all know that there are so many areas where young people don't have equal opportunities, but I think it is behoving on us in this Parliament to do all we can to redress those inequalities. And we know in relation to some aspects of culture that traditionally they have been very, very class-based, and those with money have been able to develop their talents in lots of areas and others haven't. And I think music is one area like that, and the figures that Jenny Mara gave for different schools in different areas of Dundee illustrates that very powerfully. So I do think there is an obligation on us to address that particular problem and to regard it as a national priority. It is quite scandalous that people in some of our more disadvantaged areas should be lacking the opportunities that their neighbours in wealthier areas have to develop their musical talents. So I do think that we have to regard this as an issue where the Parliament does need to take some action. We can't just leave it to local authorities to make up their mind, and that's why, as Patricia Ferguson reminded us, a previous government did take some initiatives in this kind of area through the Youth Music Initiative, through the creation of cultural coordinators, to try and democratise culture, if you like, to try and give opportunities to as wide a range of people to develop their talents in what would generally be regarded as cultural areas. So I think we were right to do that when we were in government, and I think the current government should also rise to that challenge and realise the importance of music. They already do that. The money that they gave to Glasgow for El Sistema a week or so ago illustrates that they do recognise the value of this, but it is not good enough just to give that opportunity to a very small number of people. We have to give this opportunity to the widest range of people that we can, because that seems to me to be what justice and equity require. In general, I think perhaps the government does deserve some credit for shifting some of the balance of policy discussion to the early years, but I think this is an important aspect of giving people opportunities in the early years to develop their talents and to develop their personalities and abilities more generally. So I do strongly support the motion that Iain-Gray's brought before us today, and I commend Scotland on Sunday for taking up this campaign. And I think it does illustrate that it shouldn't get caught up in this general argument about what is free and what is not, because Scotland on Sunday perhaps wouldn't support universal entitlements in quite a few of the areas that the government might support. But it has recognised that this is a key area where charges should not be imposed, and I think it is incumbent on us to try and act on that principle and address this problem.
Many, many thanks. I now call on Dr. Alistair Allen to close the debate on behalf of the Government. 7 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to thank Iain-Gray for tabling the motion we are debating this evening, and I certainly welcome the opportunity that there's been to listen to the thoughts and views expressed tonight. Because, like all of us here, I'm certainly passionate that children and young people experience all aspects of the broad general education they're entitled to under the Curriculum for Excellence, and this includes the opportunity to play a range of musical instruments, in my view. One of the benefits of this job is that I get to visit schools and see firsthand what is being achieved in our classrooms on a daily basis, and I never cease to be amazed by the innovative examples of teaching and learning that I witness. In that, I concur with Mr Gray, as well as Patricia Ferguson and others, about the liberating power that music has for many communities within Scotland and worldwide. And because of all this, I absolutely agree that music and learning to play a musical instrument can play a key role in a child's education, benefiting their academic and social development, and, as Liz Smith mentioned, inspiring children in other areas of the curriculum too. It never pleases me more than when I attend and occasionally sing at national events such as the Mod, and I'm able to listen to the voices and traditional instrumental pieces expertly performed by youngsters around the country. I saw that firsthand when I was comparing the Barra local Mod earlier this year. But this evening's debate is about ultimately the value of instrumental music tuition and our shared belief that every child should have the opportunity to learn to play a musical instrument. Now, all of that agreed, I do feel the need to stress and perhaps clarify that whilst Mr Gray requested that Parliament notes that 24 of Scotland's 32 local authorities are charging up to £340 per year for instrumental tuition, the charges, it should be said, are applied to instrumental music tuition provided via the authority's instrumental tuition service, not for classroom music lessons as part of the child's curriculum learning. Now, I appreciate there is an issue in some authorities around the question of classroom teachers only being able to provide perhaps 3 or 4 instruments themselves, and a debate then emerging about which other musical instruments should be paid for free. But I think it's an important debate to have, not least because of the point that Tavish Scott raises around the importance of some instruments to local musical traditions. Local authorities are under a great deal of pressure to deliver the services required of them. I think we all agree that. However, the issue of charging for instrumental music tuition is not straightforward. If Liz Smith or others have evidence that there are local authorities who are profiting from any charges applied for accessing such provision, I would be pleased to see it and willing to look at it. I have to say I presently do not have such evidence. And out of all the authorities who do apply charges to their instrumental tuition service, again in the interest of fairness it should be said there is only one which does not offer concessions. All other authorities offer a range of concessionary rates dependent upon local policy and family circumstances. However, can I agree with Mr Gray, with Claire Adamson, with Jenny Mara and many others tonight that no child should be denied the chance to develop their musical talent. There is and there should be systems in place to ensure that no child is ever denied an opportunity because of their background. This Government is committed to working with local authorities and with COSLA to find a way forward on this matter. We need to establish greater clarity regarding the position on charging for instrumental music tuition around the country. And our first priority is to examine the position for pupils undertaking SQA national qualifications. The Scotland on Sundays Let the Children Play campaign raises a number of important issues. Some of them have been echoed by members in the Chamber tonight, not least of which is the array of charging practices across the country and how they differ. I am committed to finding solutions to the issues raised by the campaign. We are working with our colleagues in local government to find a way forward in tough financial times so that we do maximise access to music tuition. I've met with my Cabinet colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs, regarding the contribution of the Youth Music Initiative to this debate, as others have mentioned this initiative. The Youth Music Initiative has received wide recognition for providing high-quality music-making opportunities for all young people, not just school children, and particularly for those, who may not otherwise have had opportunities to participate. Now, given what Stuart McMillan and others have said about the cost of individual instruments, this is clearly an important factor. Without a doubt, part of the challenge that we face in increasing pressure for instrumental music tuition in schools comes from the continued success of the Youth Music Initiative. And I was delighted to see that, for instance, the Scottish Brass Band Association have attributed the dramatic increase in the number of brass bands in Scotland to Youth Music Initiative funding. And funding projects and creating opportunities for young people to get involved in all types of music is a continued commitment from this government. So, to conclude, Presiding Officer, and to respond to, if I can briefly, in doing so, to questions raised by Alison Johnson and others, the matter of the provision of instrumental music tuition in schools, something which varies widely across Scotland and is a complicated matter, is one that the Government is committed to examining in detail. And picking up on Malcolm Chisholm's point about the need to begin with principles, the Scottish Government does begin with the principle that no child should be excluded from their ability to develop their musical talent because of the financial pressure or because of their background. Learning in music and the wider expressive arts, Presiding Officer, also plays a role in supporting young people to recognise and value the variety and vitality of our culture locally, nationally and globally. I am just concluding, but I will give way.
Iain-Gray. I just wondered if I'm very pleased that the review of the current circumstances and discussions of how we could move forward are underway, and I wonder if the Minister is going to give us a specific date or timeline when he might report back on the outcome of those discussions. Minister.
I can certainly undertake to report back soon to this Parliament. By soon, I do not mean in a glacial space of time. I do mean early in the new year. I would like to be able to report back with some of the progress of these discussions. And for these reasons, I would like to commit the Scottish Parliament, to commit the Scottish Government to helping to address the issue of instrumental music tuition in schools. And I would like to express my support for the sentiments of this motion.
Many, many thanks. That's it, and I close this meeting of Parliament. Thank you all.